The crash of baccarat crystal against the marble floor of the Plaza Hotel wasn't just a dropped tray. It was the sound of New York's social hierarchy shattering. Adrian Sterling, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations, stood drenched in vintage Cabernet, his eyes cold enough to freeze hell over. But the terrifying part wasn't his anger, nor the silence that choked the room. It was the woman standing opposite him. Hallie Bennett didn't tremble. She didn't apologize. She stepped over the broken glass, looked the most powerful man in Manhattan dead in the eye, and whispered a sentence that would cost her everything, and eventually gain her the world. This is the story of the only woman who ever said no to the King of Wall Street. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel tasted of money. It was a specific scent, a mixture of expensive perfumes, Santal 33 and Baccarat Rouge, mingled with the metallic tang of chilled oysters and the heavy, dusty smell of old money. For Hallie Bennett, however, it smelled like a headache. She adjusted the collar of her high-necked catering uniform, which was itching terribly. Hallie was 26, with sharp hazel eyes that had seen too much of the ugly side of life, and dark hair pulled back into a severe bun required by Elite Serve, the catering agency that currently owned her nights. Her feet throbbed in the cheap, non-slip shoes as she weaved through the crowd of tuxedos and ball gowns, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes. Tonight was the Orion Gala, the single most exclusive event in the New York philanthropic calendar. The guest list was a who's who of the Forbes 400. You had tech moguls like Jameson Locke, oil heiresses, and politicians who could rewrite laws with a text message. But the center of gravity in the room was undeniably Adrian Sterling. Adrian Sterling was 34, standing 6'2" with the kind of build that suggested he boxed to release aggression, not just for fitness. He was the COO of Sterling Dynamics, a conglomerate that had its fingers in everything from aerospace defense to pharmaceutical patents. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, eyes the color of steel, and a mouth that rarely smiled unless it was a smirk of victory. Hallie had been warned about him during the pre-shift briefing. "Stay out of Sterling's way," the floor manager, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, had hissed. "He hates clutter. He hates waiting. If he looks at you, you apologize and move. Understood?" Hallie had nodded, needing the overtime pay to cover her sister's tuition. She wasn't here to make waves. She was here to be invisible. The incident happened at 9:15 p.m. Hallie was circling the VIP section, a roped-off area near the orchestra. Adrian Sterling was holding court, surrounded by a sycophantic group of investors. He looked bored, twirling a glass of whiskey, barely listening to a man pitching a renewable energy startup. Next to Adrian stood a younger waiter, a kid named Leo, who couldn't have been more than 19. Leo was trembling. He was holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and his hand was shaking so badly the ceramic spoons were clinking together. "Stop that noise," Adrian said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was a low baritone that cut through the ambient chatter like a razor. Leo froze. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I didn't ask for an explanation," Adrian said, turning his cold gaze onto the boy. "I asked for silence. You are vibrating like a tuning fork. It's pathetic. Put the tray down and leave." "Sir, I can't," Leo stammered, his face pale. "Mr. Henderson said I have to circulate the—" "And I own the building Mr. Henderson is standing in," Adrian interrupted. He took a step closer to the boy. The cruelty in his eyes was casual, bored. He reached out and tipped the edge of Leo's tray with one finger. Gravity took over. The tray tipped. Leo scrambled to catch it, but he fumbled. A slide of tuna tartar and ceramic spoons crashed onto Adrian's polished Oxfords. The room went silent. The orchestra seemed to stop mid-note. Leo looked like he was about to faint. "Oh my God, sir, I'll clean it. I'm so sorry." He dropped to his knees, grabbing a napkin, reaching for Adrian's shoes. "Don't touch me," Adrian said, stepping back as if the boy were contagious. He looked around the circle of his peers, clearly annoyed that his evening was disrupted. "Someone get this incompetence out of my sight, and ensure he never works in this city again." Leo began to sob, a quiet, terrified sound. That was when the invisible line in Halle's mind snapped. She knew the rules. She knew the cost. But she also looked at Leo, a kid terrified of a man who had everything, and she felt a rage so hot it burned her throat. She walked over. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble was the only sound in the vicinity. "He's 19, Halle said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Adrian slowly turned his head. He looked at her as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Excuse me?" Halle set her tray down on a nearby cocktail table. She walked over to Leo, grabbed him by the arm, and pulled him to his feet. "Get up, Leo. You don't kneel to him." "Who are you?" Adrian asked. His voice dropped an octave, dangerous and soft. "I'm the person telling you to have some dignity," Halle said, meeting his gaze. She was a foot shorter than him, but in that moment, she felt 10 feet tall. It was an accident. He's a kid working a minimum wage job. You're a billionaire. Buy a new pair of shoes and get over yourself. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jameson Locke, the tech CEO, actually dropped his jaw. Adrian stared at her. For a second, he looked genuinely confused. It was possible that in his entire adult life, no one had ever spoken to him like this. The confusion quickly hardened into ice. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I know what you are," Halle retorted. "You're a bully in a $5,000 suit." Adrian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Mr. Henderson," he barked, without breaking eye contact with Halle. The manager sprinted over, sweating profusely. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I am so—" "Fire her," Adrian said. "And him. Now. Done. Consider it done," Henderson squeaked. He turned to Halle, grabbing her arm. "You stupid girl, get out now!" Halle yanked her arm back. "Don't touch me." She looked at Adrian one last time. He was watching her with a mix of fury and intense curiosity. She reached for a glass of red wine from a passing tray, a tray carried by another terrified waiter. "You wanted a reason to ruin someone's night?" Halle said. She tipped the glass. The dark red liquid splashed squarely onto the white shirt front of his tuxedo, blooming like a gunshot wound. "Now you have one," she whispered. She dropped the empty glass. It shattered. "I quit." She turned on her heel and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the richest man in New York, dripping wet and staring at her back in stunned silence. The adrenaline wore off exactly 45 minutes later, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Halle sat on the fire escape of her apartment building in Queens, the cold night air biting through her thin sweater. The view wasn't of the glittering Manhattan skyline, but of a brick wall and a dumpster. She lit a cigarette, her hands finally starting to shake. "You idiot," she muttered to herself. "You absolute idiot." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her landlord. "Rent is due Tuesday. No extensions this time, Halle." She closed her eyes. She needed that job. Elite serve paid better than the diner, and the tips from the galas were the only thing keeping her sister, Chloe, in physical therapy. Chloe had been in a car accident 2 years ago, the same accident that killed their parents, and the medical bills were a bottomless pit that swallowed every dollar Halle made. The next morning, the fallout began. Halle called the temp agency she sometimes used. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett," the recruiter said, her voice tight. We've flagged your file." "Flagged it? Why?" "We received a notice regarding professional misconduct. We can't place you." She called the high-end restaurant in Tribeca, where she was on the wait list for a hosting gig. "Positions filled," the manager said abruptly, and hung up. By noon, it was clear. Adrian Sterling hadn't just fired her. He had nuked her existence. He had put the word out. In the hospitality industry of New York, the Sterling name was law. If he said you were unhireable, you didn't work. 3 days passed. Hallie was down to eating instant ramen. She was looking at listings for janitorial work in New Jersey, anything that wouldn't check her background against the high society blacklist. On the 4th night, it rained. A storm battered the city, turning the Queen streets into rivers of grey sludge. Hallie was in her apartment, trying to fix a leak in the ceiling with duct tape, when a knock came at the door. It wasn't the frantic knock of a neighbor or the heavy pound of the landlord. It was 3 precise, authoritative raps. She frowned, stepping down from the chair. She wasn't expecting anyone. Chloe was at the care facility for the week. Hallie opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. Standing in her dimly lit hallway was a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, though currently he looked remarkably out of place next to her peeling wallpaper. He was wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than her entire building. He held a black umbrella. It wasn't Adrian Sterling. It was an older man, perhaps in his 50s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a butler who had served royalty, or perhaps an assassin who preferred poison. "Ms. Hal Bennett?" he asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur Pennyworth. I am Mr. Adrian Sterling's Chief of Staff." Hallie slammed the door. She leaned her back against the wood, heart hammering. "He sent someone. He's going to sue me for the suit, or for emotional distress, or he's just going to have me evicted." "Ms. Bennett," the man's voice came through the door, calm and unruffled. "I am not here to serve you papers. I am here to offer you a job." Hallie froze. She unlocked the chain and opened the door again. "Is this a joke? Because it's not funny." Arthur folded his umbrella. "Mr. Sterling does not make jokes. May I come in?" Hallie hesitated, then stepped back. "If you try anything, I have a baseball bat and I know how to use it." Arthur stepped into the tiny, cluttered apartment. He glanced at the duct tape on the ceiling, but said nothing. He placed a briefcase on her wobbly kitchen table. "Mr. Sterling was impressed by your performance at the gala," Arthur said. "Impressed?" Hallie scoffed. "I threw wine on him. He blacklisted me from every job in the city." "Correction? He ensured you were available," Arthur said. "Mr. Sterling requires a specific set of skills for an upcoming engagement. He requires someone who is observant, fearless, and crucially, someone who is invisible to the people he associates with." "I'm not invisible," Hallie snapped. "To men like Preston Calloway and the board of directors?" "Yes, you are," Arthur said gently. "You are staff. You are the help. They speak in front of you because they do not believe you are listening. They do not believe you are smart enough to understand the implications of their conversations." Hallie narrowed her eyes. "What kind of job is this?" Arthur clicked the briefcase open. Inside were stacks of cash, $50,000, easily. "Mr. Sterling is hosting a private poker game at his penthouse in 2 days. The stakes are incredibly high, not just money, but control of a subsidiary company. He suspects he is being cheated, but he cannot prove it. He needs a waitress in the room, someone who can pour whiskey, light cigars, and watch every hand, every signal, every eye movement." "He wants a spy," Hallie said. "He wants you," Arthur corrected. Because you are the only person who stood up to him. He believes you are the only one who won't be bought off by his enemies." Hallie looked at the money. It was enough to pay for Chloe's therapy for a year. It was enough to move out of this hole. "And if I say no?" "Then the blacklist remains," Arthur said simply, "and you will likely be evicted by Tuesday." It was blackmail, wrapped in a golden bow. It was despicable. It was Adrian Sterling all over. Hallie looked at Arthur. "Tell him I'll do it, but I have conditions." "Mr. Sterling anticipated you might. He is willing to negotiate, within reason." "Double the money," Hallie said, her voice shaking slightly but her chin high. "And he apologizes to Leo, the kid he fired." Arthur's lips twitched, almost into a smile. "I can authorize the funds. The apology, you may have to take that up with Mr. Sterling yourself." The penthouse at the top of the Sterling Tower was less of a home and more of a fortress in the sky. It was all glass, steel, and modern art that looked like violence captured on canvas. Hallie arrived 2 hours early. She had been outfitted by a team Arthur sent, a sleek black dress that was elegant but designed to blend into the background. Her hair was done, her makeup flawless. She looked like a high-end model, but her role was to be a ghost. Adrian entered the room while she was setting up the bar cart. He was wearing a tuxedo again, looking as devastatingly handsome as he had at the gala, though the wine stain was gone. He stopped when he saw her. The room went quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning. "You came," he said. "You didn't leave me much choice," Hallie replied, not looking up from the lemons she was slicing. She wielded the knife with practiced precision. Adrian walked over to the bar. He poured himself a water. "You were right, by the way." Hallie paused. She looked at him. "About what?" "The shoes," he said. "They were replaceable. My dignity, however, took a bit of a hit." "Good," Hallie said. Adrian leaned against the bar, studying her. Up close, his eyes were an intense shade of grey, flecked with blue. There was a tiredness in them that hadn't been visible from across the ballroom. "Tonight is dangerous, Hallie," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded strange coming from him. Intimate. "The men coming here, Preston Calloway specifically, are sharks. If they catch you listening, if they suspect you're feeding me information, I cannot guarantee your safety." "I thought you were the most powerful man in New York," she challenged. "I am," he said. "But even a king can be stabbed in the back if he's not watching the shadows. That's why you're here. You're my eyes. And what are you?" "I'm the bait," he said grimly. The guests arrived at 8 p.m. There were 5 of them. The most prominent was Preston Calloway, a man with a fake tan and teeth so white they looked radioactive. He was Adrian's chief rival, a man who had been trying to acquire Sterling Dynamics for years through hostile takeovers. Then there was Victor Moretti, a heavy-set construction magnate with mob ties, and Senator John Clay, who looked nervous. The game was Texas Hold'em. The buy-in was $1 million. Hallie moved through the room like smoke. She poured scotch, Blue Label for Preston, Macallan for Adrian. She emptied ashtrays. She kept her head down, but her ears were open. "Nice girl," Victor Moretti grunted, watching Hallie walk away. "New?" "Temporary," Adrian said dismissively, checking his cards. Hard to find good help these days. Hallie felt a spike of irritation, but pushed it down. Play the role. For the first hour it was standard banter. Politics, stocks, women. But as the pot grew, reaching $10 million, the atmosphere shifted. Hallie was pouring water for Preston Calloway when she saw it. It was subtle. So subtle that if she hadn't been looking for it, she would have missed it. Preston tapped his cigar twice on the edge of the crystal ashtray. Across the table, the dealer, a professional hired from a casino in Atlantic City, shifted his weight on his left foot. Hallie circled the room. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Preston tapped the cigar once. The dealer shifted to his right foot. It was a code. Adrian was losing. He was down $4 million. He was keeping a poker face, but Hallie could see the tension in his jaw. He was playing the odds, but the odds were rigged. She had to tell him. But how? She couldn't just whisper in his ear. It would look suspicious. She waited until the next break in the hand. Adrian signaled for a refill. Hallie walked over with the decanter. As she poured the whiskey, she leaned in, pretending to wipe a smudge off the table near his elbow. "The cigar," she whispered, her lips barely moving. 1 tap is high cards. 2 taps is a pair. The dealer is watching his feet. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He just took a sip of his drink. "Thank you," he said aloud, his voice flat. The next hand was the biggest of the night. The pot was 20 million. The deed to a massive robotics factory in Detroit was on the table. Preston Calloway smiled, his radioactive teeth gleaming. He tapped his cigar twice. He had a pair, or better. The dealer dealt the river card. Adrian looked at his cards. He looked at Preston. Then he looked at the dealer. "All in," Adrian said. Preston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He checked the dealer. The dealer gave a microscopic nod. "He thinks Adrian is bluffing." "Call," Preston said, pushing his chips forward. "Read 'em and weep, Sterling. 3 kings." He slammed his cards down. Adrian sat back. He let the silence stretch. He took a slow sip of the whiskey Hallie had poured. 3 kings is a strong hand, Preston, Adrian said softly. But unfortunately, he flipped his cards. Royal flush. The room erupted. Preston stood up so fast his chair toppled over. "That's impossible. The odds are astronomical," Adrian finished coldly. "Unless you know exactly what's coming. And tonight, luck was on my side." Adrian stood up. He looked at the dealer. "Get out of my house before I have security throw you off the balcony." The dealer ran. Preston Calloway turned purple. He looked at Adrian, then his eyes darted to Hallie, standing in the corner. He realized something. He didn't know what she had done, but he knew the variable had changed. "This isn't over, Sterling," Preston hissed. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming for you." "Get out, Preston," Adrian said. When the room finally cleared, leaving only Adrian and Hallie, the tension didn't dissipate. It changed flavor. Adrian walked over to the window, looking out at the city. "You saved me $50 million tonight." "You're welcome," Hallie said, leaning against the bar, exhausted. "Does this mean I get a bonus?" Adrian turned around. For the first time, he smiled. A real smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less like a statue, and more like a man. "I have a better proposition," he said. "I don't think I want another proposition from you." "Hallie," he said, stepping closer. Preston wasn't just trying to win money. He was trying to bankrupt me to force a merger. He mentioned something before he left. "You have no idea what's coming. He has leverage on me. Information I don't know about." "So?" "So," Adrian said, stopping a foot away from her. "I need you to keep working for me. Not as a waitress, as my personal assistant. I need someone who sees the things I miss. Someone Preston Calloway won't suspect until it's too late." "And why should I trust you?" Hallie asked. "You ruined my life a week ago." "Because," Adrian said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, soft register again, "I think you and I are the only 2 real people in this entire city, and I think I might be in trouble." Hallie looked at him. She saw the vulnerability behind the power. It was a trap, surely, but it was also the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. "I'll do it," she said, "but no more uniforms." "Agreed," Adrian said. He held out his hand. Hallie shook it. His grip was warm, firm. Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment their hands touched, the real game had begun, and the cards were about to get much, much bloodier. The transition from the grime of Queens to the 65th floor of the Sterling Tower was violent. It wasn't just a commute, it was a migration between planets. On her first official day as Adrian Sterling's executive liaison, a title Arthur Pennyworth had invented to bypass HR protocols, Hallie Bennett learned that silence in a corporate office is louder than screaming. She stepped out of the private elevator, wearing a tailored navy pantsuit that Arthur had provided. It fit perfectly, armor for the modern gladiator, but she still felt like an imposter. The reception area was an expanse of white marble and minimalist furniture that looked uncomfortable on purpose. Sitting behind the main desk was Lydia Cross. Lydia was the senior executive assistant. She was beautiful in a way that suggested she subsisted on kale juice and the misery of others. She had been with Sterling Dynamics for 5 years and had likely assumed that she would eventually ascend to the role of Adrian's right hand, or perhaps his wife. The arrival of a former catering waitress had shattered that trajectory. "You're late," Lydia said, not looking up from her typing. Her nails were painted a blood red that matched the soles of her Louboutins. "It's 7:55, Hallie replied, checking her watch. "Call time was 8 hours. Mr. Sterling arrives at 7:45. If you aren't here before him, you are late," Lydia said. She finally looked up, her eyes scanning Hallie's outfit with clinical disdain. "He's in the conference room. He wants coffee. Black. Sumatra roast only. 195 degrees. If you burn it, he will know." Hallie didn't flinch. "Good morning to you too, Lydia." She walked past the desk, feeling Lydia's glare burning a hole between her shoulder blades. This was the battlefield. It wasn't just Adrian she had to survive. It was an entire ecosystem of sharks who smelled fresh blood. Hallie found the kitchenette, brewed the coffee with the precision of someone who had worked double shifts at a diner for 6 years, and entered the conference room. Adrian was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table. He was surrounded by 4 men, his inner circle. There was Grant Miller, the CFO, a man with a receding hairline and a nervous habit of clicking his pen. Thomas Reed, the legal counsel, who looked like a bulldog in a suit, and 2 other board members. They stopped talking when Hallie entered. "Coffee," Hallie said, placing the cup on a coaster near Adrian's hand. Adrian didn't look at her, but he took a sip. He paused. The room held its breath. Lydia had warned her about the temperature. "Acceptable," Adrian muttered. He gestured to the empty chair to his right. "Sit." Grant Miller scoffed. "Adrian, surely you're joking. This is a confidential strategy meeting regarding the acquisition of Kovacs Robotics. We can't have support staff present." "Hallie isn't support staff," Adrian said, his eyes fixed on a projection of stock trends. "She is my external auditor of human behavior. She stays." Grant turned a shade of red that clashed with his tie. "This is highly irregular. She has no clearance, no background in finance." "And you have no background in detecting lies, Grant, which is why we lost the bid last quarter," Adrian shot back. "Proceed." The meeting was a blur of numbers, acronyms, and projections. Hallie understood perhaps 30% of the technical jargon. EBITDA, leveraged buyouts, hostile tender offers. But she didn't need to understand the math. She needed to watch the men. They were discussing Kovacs Robotics, a Hungarian firm with groundbreaking drone technology. Sterling Dynamics wanted to buy them out. The CEO of Kovacs, A man named Laszlo was flying in tomorrow to sign the deal. The numbers look solid, Grant said, sliding a dossier across the table. Kovac is desperate. Their stock has dipped. We can get them for 15% under market value. I recommend we push for the signature immediately. Adrian flipped through the dossier. It feels too easy. Laszlo is a stubborn old mule. Why is he selling now? Health issues, Thomas Reed said. Rumor is he has heart trouble. Wants to retire to the countryside. Adrian looked unconvinced. He turned to Halle. She had been silent for 40 minutes, observing. What do you think? Adrian asked her. Grant rolled his eyes audibly. Halle looked at the photo of Laszlo Kovac projected on the screen, then at the dossier Grant had prepared. I don't know about the stock price, Halle said slowly, but I used to work catering for the medical board fundraisers. I saw Laszlo there 3 months ago. And? Grant snapped. Did you serve him a pig in a blanket? No, Halle said, ignoring him. I saw him eating a steak, rare, and drinking scotch. He was smoking a cigar outside. She turned to Adrian. If a man has heart trouble serious enough to sell his life's work, he isn't eating red meat and smoking cigars. He's on a strict diet. He's scared. The room went quiet. Maybe he just doesn't care, Thomas suggested. Or, Halle said, the rumor about his health is a lie. A cover story. Why would someone lie about being sick? Adrian's eyes narrowed. To hide the real reason they need cash fast. Adrian picked up his phone. Arthur, he said into the speaker, dig into Laszlo's family. Not him. His children. Specifically, look for debts, gambling, cartel, anything. On it, sir, Arthur's voice crackled back. 10 minutes later, Arthur walked into the room with a tablet. You were right, Arthur said, nodding at Halle. Laszlo isn't sick. His son, Stefan, owes 40 million euros to a syndicate in Budapest. They've threatened to liquidate the son if the father doesn't pay by Friday. Laszlo is selling the company to pay the ransom. Grant Miller paled. If that's true, if the money is for a criminal syndicate, the SEC would freeze the acquisition. We'd be investigated for money laundering ties. The stock would tank. We would have walked into a federal trap, Adrian said softly. He looked at Grant. You missed that. I looked at the balance sheets, Grant stammered. Halle looked at the man, Adrian said. He stood up. Cancel the meeting with Laszlo. Tell him we know about Stefan. Tell him we'll loan him the money personally in exchange for a 5% stake and a seat on the board. But we aren't buying the company. That keeps our hands clean and gives us leverage. He turned to Halle. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good catch. As the executives filed out, looking defeated, Halle felt a surge of adrenaline. She hadn't just poured coffee. She had saved the company from a federal investigation. But as she left the room, she caught Grant Miller watching her. He wasn't looking at her with the annoyance of a superior anymore. He was looking at her with the cold, calculating hatred of a man who realized he had a dangerous new enemy. Halle had survived the first battle, but she had just painted a target on her back. 2 weeks later, the request came. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. The Winter Solstice Ball, Arthur said, placing a velvet box on Halle's desk. Mr. Sterling requires your attendance. I thought I was an analyst now, Halle said, typing up a report on a rival tech firm. Do I have to serve hors d'oeuvres? No, Arthur said. You are attending as his guest. Halle stopped typing. His date? His associate. But to the public eye, yes. It is strategic. Mr. Sterling has not been seen with a consistent companion in years. Bringing you signals stability. It confuses his enemies. Halle opened the velvet box. Inside was a dress. It was emerald green silk, backless, with a neckline that was daring but sophisticated. It looked like it cost more than her sister's entire medical history. "There is also this," Arthur said, sliding a smaller box forward. "Diamond earrings. On loan from the vault. Do not lose them." That evening, the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. The Temple of Dendur was bathed in soft amber light. A string quartet played Debussy. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. When Hallie walked in on Adrian's arm, the flashbulbs were blinding. "Keep walking," Adrian murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back. "Don't look at the cameras. Look at me." Hallie looked up at him. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He looked invincible, but she could feel the tension in his arm. "They're all watching," she whispered. "Let them watch," he said. "They're trying to figure out who you are. The mystery makes us powerful." They mingled. Hallie played her part perfectly. She laughed at bad jokes told by senators. She discussed art with gallery owners, using knowledge she'd crammed from Wikipedia the night before. Then, Adrian was pulled away by the mayor of New York for a photo op. "Stay here," Adrian said. "I'll be 2 minutes." Hallie stood near a sculpture of an Egyptian goddess, taking a sip of champagne. "You clean up well, Miss Bennett?" The voice was like oil sliding over gravel. Hallie stiffened. She turned to find Preston Calloway standing there. He looked older up close, his fake tan settling into the wrinkles around his eyes. He held a glass of scotch and smiled, but his eyes were dead. "Mr. Calloway," Hallie said, keeping her voice even. "I assume you're enjoying the party?" "I was," he said, "until I saw the help parading around in couture." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You think you're clever, don't you? Reading signals, whispering in Adrian's ear." "I'm just doing my job." "You're a liability," Preston sneered. "I did some digging, Hallie. Found out about your sister. Chloe, right? Physical therapy at St. Jude's? Expensive facility." Hallie's blood ran cold. "Leave my sister out of this." "I own the debt collection agency that holds your parents' medical bills," Preston said, taking a sip of his drink. "I could call in that debt tomorrow. Wage garnishment, asset seizure. Chloe would be out on the street in a wheelchair by the weekend." Hallie felt nausea rise in her throat. "What do you want?" "I want information," Preston whispered. "Sterling is bidding on a government defense contract next month. Project Aegis. I want his bid price. You get me that number, and your sister's debt disappears. Poof." "I'm not a traitor," Hallie hissed. "Everyone is a traitor for the right price," Preston smiled. "Think about it. You have 24 hours. He reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto Preston's wrist. It was a grip of iron. Adrian was there. He hadn't run, but he had moved with terrifying speed. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were blazing with a violence that made Preston flinch. "If you ever touch her again," Adrian said, his voice low enough that only the three of them could hear, "I will burn your company to the ground. Preston, I won't buy it. I won't merge with it. I will dismantle it, brick by brick, until you are begging for change on the subway." He shoved Preston's hand away. "We're leaving," Adrian said to Hallie. He guided her out of the hall, past the confused photographers, and into his waiting limousine. Once the door closed, the silence was heavy. Hallie was shaking. "He knows about Chloe," she whispered. "He threatened to evict her." Adrian didn't speak. He opened the minibar, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. His hands were shaking too, just slightly. "He won't," Adrian said. "I bought the debt." Hallie looked at him, stunned. "What?" "This morning," Adrian said, looking out the window at the passing city lights. Arthur found the connection. I bought the collection agency holding your family's debt at 9 a.m. Preston has no leverage. You paid it? Hallie felt tears prick her eyes. Why? Because you're my people now, Adrian said. He turned to look at her. The barrier was down. He looked tired and incredibly lonely. And I protect what is mine. Adrian, she asked softly, why do you hate them so much? People like Preston. People like your uncle. Adrian sighed. He loosened his tie. My father didn't commit suicide, he said quietly. Everyone thinks he jumped from the office window because of the '08 crash. He didn't. He was pushed. Not physically, but my uncle, Richard, and men like Preston Calloway. They framed him for embezzlement he didn't commit. They threatened to send my mother to prison if he didn't take the fall. He took his life to protect the insurance payout for us. Hallie covered her mouth. Oh my God. I was 20, Adrian said. I stood at his funeral and shook hands with the men who killed him. I swore then that I would get it all back. Every cent, every company. I would own them. He looked at Hallie, his eyes intense. That's why I need you, Hallie. Because you aren't one of them. You're the only person in 6 months who has looked at me and seen a human being, not a bank account. Hallie reached out and took his hand. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. For a moment, in the back of the limousine, the billionaire and the waitress weren't boss and employee. They were just two broken people holding on to each other in the dark. But outside the window, the city was watching, and Preston Calloway was making a phone call. For 3 months, life was perfect. Hallie settled into her role. She moved Chloe into a better facility. She and Adrian developed a rhythm, a shorthand of glances and nods that made them formidable in meetings. They weren't lovers, not technically, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. Then, the sky fell. It happened on a Tuesday. Hallie arrived at the office to find security guards standing at her desk. Lydia Cross was standing there, a look of triumphant glee on her face. What's going on? Hallie asked, dropping her bag. Mr. Sterling wants to see you, the head of security said grimly. Now. They escorted her into Adrian's office. He was standing by the window, his back to her. The room felt freezing. Grant Miller was there, along with Thomas Reed and Arthur. Arthur looked pale. He wouldn't meet Hallie's eyes. Adrian, Hallie asked. What happened? Adrian turned around. His face was unrecognizable. The warmth, the trust, it was all gone, replaced by the cold, dead look of the man who had fired the waiter at the plaza. Project Aegis, Adrian said. His voice was devoid of emotion. The blueprints. They were leaked to a Chinese competitor this morning. We lost the bid. Sterling Dynamics stock has dropped 12% in 4 hours. That's terrible, Hallie said. But what does that have to do with me? Grant Miller stepped forward, throwing a stack of papers onto the desk. Don't play dumb, Grant spat. We traced the leak. The files were downloaded from your terminal at 2:00 a.m. last night, and at 2:15 a.m., a payment of $500,000 was wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account in your name. Hallie felt the blood drain from her face. That's a lie. I wasn't even here last night. I was with my sister. We have the logs, Hallie, Adrian said. He walked over to the desk and picked up the bank transfer record. It's your signature. It's forged, Hallie cried. She looked at Arthur. Arthur, you know me. You know I wouldn't do this. Arthur looked down at his shoes. The digital footprint is conclusive, Miss Bennett. The password used was yours. Hallie looked at Adrian. She stepped toward him. Adrian, look at me. Preston Calloway threatened me at the gala. He wanted me to steal the bid. I told you. He's framing me. Preston Calloway is in London, Adrian said coldly. He has an ironclad alibi, and the money is in your account. He looked at her with a mixture of betrayal and disgust that broke her heart more than the accusation itself. I trusted you, Adrian said quietly. I told you about my father. I let you into my life, and you sold me out for $500,000. I didn't, Hallie screamed. Tears were streaming down her face now. Please, you have to believe me. Get her out of here, Adrian said, turning his back on her again. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. If you ever come near this building or my family again, I will have you arrested for corporate espionage. Adrian, please! The security guards grabbed her arms. They dragged her out. She saw Lydia Cross smirking as she was hauled past the reception desk. She saw the other employees staring. She was thrown out onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, her box of belongings dumped beside her. It was raining again, just like the night Arthur had come to her apartment. Hallie sat on the wet pavement, sobbing. She had lost everything, her job, her reputation, and the man she had started to love. She checked her phone, a notification from her bank, account frozen. Preston, or whoever was behind this, had been thorough. They hadn't just fired her, they had destroyed her. She wiped her eyes. She stood up. The old Halle, the waitress who took hits and kept moving, rose to the surface. She walked to a nearby payphone. She wouldn't use her cell in case they were tracking it. She dialed a number she had memorized from a napkin months ago. Hello? A young, nervous voice answered. Leo, Hallie said, her voice hard as steel. It's Hallie, the woman who saved you at the plaza. Hallie! Oh my God, I heard on the news. They're saying you stole... I didn't steal anything, Hallie cut him off. But I'm going to find out who did. And I need your help. You still work catering at the Sterling Executive Lounge, right? Yeah, I do. Good, Hallie said. I need you to get me the security tapes from the 65th floor, not the digital ones, the analog backups in the basement server room. The ones Grant Miller forgets exist. Hallie, that's crazy. If I get caught... If you don't help me, Hallie said, the men who did this to me are going to win. They're going to destroy Adrian. I know he fired me, Leo, but I'm not going to let them kill him. There was a long silence. Okay, Leo whispered. Meet me at the service entrance at midnight. Hallie hung up. She looked up at the towering spire of the Sterling building, disappearing into the mist. You made a mistake, Adrian, she whispered to the wind. You thought I was just a waitress. You forgot I know how to take out the trash. She pulled her coat tight and walked into the rain. She was done playing by the rules. It was time to break them. Midnight in the bowels of the Sterling Tower was a world away from the penthouse. There were no panoramic views here, only the hum of servers and the smell of damp concrete. Hallie Bennett waited in the shadows of the loading dock until the metal door creaked open. Leo stepped out, clutching a keycard like a lifeline. He looked terrified. You actually came, he whispered. If Henderson catches me, I'm dead. If we pull this off, you won't be answering to Henderson anymore, Hallie said, her voice steady. Take me to the archives. They descended into sub-level 3. This was the brain of Sterling Dynamics, but Hallie wasn't looking for the digital cloud. She needed the past. She needed the analog backups, the VHS tapes Adrian insisted on keeping because, as he once told her, you can't hack a physical object. They found the rack labeled Exec Floor, Cam 04. Leo's hands shook as he slotted the tape into the dusty player. Static hissed, then a grainy black and white image appeared. Tuesday, 2 a.m., Hallie commanded. Fast forward. The screen flickered. At 2:03 a.m., a figure appeared in the hallway outside Hallie's office. They were dressed in a janitor's jumpsuit, cap pulled low to hide their face. "It's just a cleaner," Leo said, disappointed. "No," Hallie pointed at the screen. "Look at the feet." The figure was wearing tasseled Italian loafers. "Janitors don't wear $2,000 Guccis," Hallie whispered. She watched the figure turn. For a split second, the profile was visible. The receding hairline, the nervous jaw tick. It was Grant Miller. He wore his own shoes, Hallie realized. Arrogant. He thought no one would ever check the tapes. She popped the cassette out. "I need this." The next morning, the Sterling Dynamics boardroom was silent as a tomb. Adrian sat at the head of the table, looking broken. The stock had plummeted. The headlines were screaming bankruptcy. To his right, Grant Miller pushed a contract across the mahogany. "It's over, Adrian," Grant said, his voice feigning sympathy. "Preston Calloway's offer is the only way to save the assets. Sign the company over. Step down." Adrian stared at the pen. The fire in his eyes was gone. He believed the woman he loved had betrayed him. He had nothing left to fight for. He lowered the pen to the paper. Bam! The double doors flew open, crashing against the walls. Hallie strode in, soaked from the rain, holding the VHS tape like a weapon. "Don't sign it!" she screamed. "Security!" Grant roared, leaping up. "Get her out!" "Let her speak!" Adrian's voice thundered, stopping the guards in their tracks. He looked at Hallie, confusion warring with hope in his eyes. Hallie marched to the AV console and shoved the tape in. "You checked the digital logs, Adrian, but Grant forged those. You can't forge this." On the massive screen, the grainy footage played. The room watched the janitor unlock Hallie's office. Then came the close-up of the shoes. Adrian looked down at Grant's feet. He was wearing the same distinct loafers. "He logged in as me," Hallie said, breathless. "He stole the plans. He sold you out to Preston." "It's a fake, a deep fake," Grant stammered, sweating. "It's a VHS cassette from 1998, Grant," Hallie said coldly. "You can't deep-fake magnetic tape." Adrian stood up. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a terrifying calm. "Get out of my building, Grant, before I throw you off the roof." As Grant was dragged away by security, screaming, the room fell silent. Adrian turned to Hallie. "Hallie," he started, stepping toward her. You didn't believe me," she said softly, backing away. "You let me fall. I cleared my name, Adrian. But I didn't do it for you." She turned and walked out, leaving the billionaire alone with his saved company and his broken heart. Hallie pushed through the revolving doors into the pouring rain, intending to disappear into the New York crowds. But before she reached the curb, she heard running footsteps, heavy, frantic steps on the wet pavement. She turned to see Adrian Sterling sprinting out of the building. He wasn't wearing a coat. He didn't have an umbrella. The King of Wall Street was getting soaked to the bone, ruining a $10,000 suit, and he didn't care. "I don't want a personal assistant," he shouted over the roar of traffic, catching her arm gently. Hallie looked at him, water dripping from her nose. "Then what do you want, Adrian?" "I want a partner," he said, breathless, his grey eyes wide and vulnerable. "I want the woman who isn't afraid to break my baccarat crystal. I was blind, Hallie. But you're the only thing I see clearly." He didn't offer her a job. He offered her his heart. Right there on Fifth Avenue, Adrian Sterling kissed the waitress who had changed his life, not caring who was watching. For the first time, he wasn't playing a game. He had already won the only prize that mattered. If you loved Hallie's journey from underdog to unstoppable, please smash that like button and share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next saga of romance, betrayal, and justice. What would you have done in Hallie's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.